All right, we are live. Gilberto, welcome. So first, I would really like to introduce you real quick before you get started. I saw in your bio that you mentioned that the future we are trying to create together requires us to reinvent how we see the world now, right? And you're a speaker, a global shaper, a John Lewis Fellow, and a climate reality leader. And you also describe yourself as a lifelong learner. So today, you will join us to talk about transitioning towards climate justice. And hopefully, together with the audience, we will be taking an interactive approach in discussing what it takes to create a green new future, which mindset will take us there, what systems, thoughts, and technologies need to be innovated to get there. So please introduce yourself real quick and help us try to imagine what your green ideal would look like.
So, innovating towards a green ideal. What does it actually take to make it happen? That's always, yeah, it's always one of the biggest things on my mind. So my name is Gilberto Morishaw. I have a master's in public administration. I'm a global shaper for the World Economic Forum. I'm a climate reality leader, also a transatlantic international leader from the German Marshall Fund. I'm an advocate, an activist, a creative, and also a professional. And I think it's so important that we allow policy to create the conditions that allow people to change and become better, and that we create a more just society. And when we talk about climate change, when we talk about the Green New Deal, what does it mean? And how do we see that being implemented in the current systems that already exist? And are those systems actually functional? Are they ready to do what it takes to actually make this green reality possible? So let's look at climate change, right? Like right now, it's a global climate catastrophe, ecosystem collapse. Um, the poles are melting. The hottest temperatures that you've ever seen, we are losing hundreds of thousands of species. It's one of the largest extinction events ever existed. And the science agrees, that climate change and global heating is real. Um, and that means that we have to do something. So what do we do, right? I think a lot of conversations have started coming up about creating a green new deal. And with a green new deal, it lends its name from the New Deal created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in the 30s. And we see a picture of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, how they've been pushing for a deal that responds to climate change and to climate destruction. The Green New Deal is a set of policy proposals, incentives, and programs created to combat climate change and create a greener future. So, what is it? What does a greener future actually mean? We can look at some of the policy proposals regarding the Green New Deal, which is economic and job security, clean water and clean air, food security, environmental justice, investing in environmentally friendly technologies, supporting industry to innovate, rolling out cleaner, cheaper, and healthier forms of private and public transport, decarbonizing the energy sector, ensuring buildings are more energy efficient, and working with international partners to improve global environmental standards. You can think about the sustainable development goals. You can think about public-private partnerships within the WEF, but also companies trying to really really make themselves carbon neutral, and countries saying that they want to be carbon negative. And we can see it around us through the media, through corporate social responsibility. Everybody wants to be greener. Even oil companies like Shell, they have like these green commercials where they're like, yes, green energy for the future, which is I'm kind of skeptical about that. But at the same time, that says how important it is right now, in this time and in this age. And that means that a lot of people are talking about it, but what are we missing? And that's the big question that's on my mind. So I would like to ask you guys to come back on screen and see what you guys think are missing.
Huh. You put us on the spot here. I feel personally, I've always felt like it was not only my individual responsibility, but also of the companies around me. And I felt like even though as an individual I really try my best in the food I buy, in reducing my plastics and stuff like this, that sometimes it barely makes an impact if I look at all the global waste that happens at these big companies. But that's just my first hunch. And maybe Thomas also has something to say about this.
Yeah, I'll try to elaborate a bit on that. In my personal life, I try to make a difference on this by I'm an electric mobility expert, and I try to advise also on sustainable housing, but also on the policy side. And I think one of my big challenges and wishes would be, for example, we had 15,000 young people marching in the Netherlands alone last year for climate justice and for a fair and just and swift transition towards a carbon-free economy. And I think Corona makes that complicated, but I think you've seen that the youth are quite constructive up till now, because I think they're one of the few who actually haven't marched yet in the streets or demonstrations. And I would like to see them properly involved in the policy making, which will make the differences. And also at the companies, for example, there was a lawyer, Natasha Harlequin, when she talked about Black Lives Matter, but she also mentioned like that at big companies like ABN AMRO, which she mentioned, I am a former employee of ABN AMRO, so like we should have more diversity at the top, but I think also diversity of topics being addressed by companies like that, and that they only pay lip service to topics like this, but they actually implement the change that we all want to see, that their customers want to see, that the policymakers say they want to achieve. So I think there's a great challenge, but also a great opportunity now. For example, with the upcoming EU summit this Saturday, I'm a bit skeptical, but also slightly hopeful that that will be part of the Green Deal and the just recovery. And I think it's also up to us as young professionals and change makers, as they say beautifully, to push for that.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's important. I think these points are so relevant because of the fact that, what I personally feel that we're always missing is a conversation on the things that are underlying all of these policies, because I think policy is important, and I think doing things is important. But what is our ontological basis? And as we go back to the PowerPoint, um, I feel what tends to be missing is a conversation on the values and systems we need to get there. And I love what you said about how companies, they should be speaking more about it. But at the same time, what which systems inside of these companies are contributing to climate injustice, and not just on an individual company level, but on a global company level, because I know a lot of people that are working at Shell and at ABN, and they're doing good things. They have the good mindset, the good intentions, and they're really pushing. But if a system has inherent injustice, inherent destructiveness within it, then we need to start questioning those underlying values. Otherwise, we can never reach a green ideal, because we're all talking about, changing the way we do things. But at the same time, the policy proposals that we create are manual at best, and aren't as impactful as we would want it to be, because they do not have the radical underlying thought that is very, it's uncomfortable. Talking about these things is uncomfortable because it requires us to let go and decondition our minds from certain mindsets that are literally the cause of climate change, and are literally the cause of many other types of injustices all across the world through history and through time. Things that we need to question to get there. What do we consider valuable? Yeah, and when we talk about valuable, do we just consider money to be valuable? Or do we consider the survival of our ecosystems to be valuable? Do we consider, what is profit? Is it just a monetary value, or is it related to the way that the company, the organization, or even the government connects with the society around them? Profit for you might just mean, you have more time to go and deal with your kids. Profit might mean that you have more energy to work on personal projects. Profit might also mean that you can build a bigger house, or you can organize parties for your community. That can also be valuable. But we live in a system which only values monetary value. And I mean, companies aren't the only ones to blame for it, because we've been indoctrinated, and we continuously perpetuate the ways of this indoctrination through what we learn in school, through how we spend our money, through what we think is good and what we think is bad, and also through, yeah, through the way we vote, through the way we connect with politics and the world around us. How do we deal with our community? um, do we see community only as a means of um, pursuing personal gain, or is community also something that is important in and of itself? And we live here in Europe, especially in the Netherlands, we live in a very hyper individualized society. And that means that we tend to focus on ourselves and our goals and our purpose. And that's not wrong, right? I think that's really, really good. At the same time, when we only focus on one side of things, we get unbalanced. And you see that happening right now. The fact that there's so many people with mental breakdowns, burnouts, the fact that a lot of people are lonely, a lot of people don't feel connected to society, suffering from depression. It is not incidental, it is systemic, it is systematic, and it's caused by the system, the same system that causes climate change. And third, this third point would be the rejection of paradigmatic thinking. And it connects to what I said before, which is that it's not either or. It's not just individualistic thinking or collectivist thinking. It's both. You have to have both, because both of them are connected to who we are as people and to how we connect to others. And when it comes to the Green New Deal, right, that means that we have to understand that there are tech solutions for things, but that these tech solutions can never solve the underlying ontological debate on what is good, what is necessary, and what is needed. Tech has to be human centric, and our solutions need to recognize that it's about justice. It's about creating a just society for everybody. Another question that we need to ask is: does our economic system fit with the values we claim to hold? I would answer no. I would answer no, because um, the fact that there is so much exploitation in the world, when we look at fast fashion, underpaying of farmers all across the world, the chocolate industry, the the coffee and the tobacco industry, how these people barely get by, living on $2 to $3 a day. That's crazy. There's still slavery happening in Libya. So our economic system functions on exploitation. And it doesn't mean that everybody that is in the economic system is evil or bad, right? But it does mean that there is something that is the specific assumptions within our economic system are clearly not working, or they are working, but they're only working for a specific group of people. I read a report 2 weeks ago, or it was last week, I think. But what it showed that in the Netherlands, 1% of the people own a third of the wealth, which is crazy. And we're not that bad compared to other countries where 1% hold almost 50% of the wealth. Um, and are our systems prepared to handle this change? So I would like to discuss with you guys, actually, so we can bring up y'all opinions again, because I'm curious to see what you guys think about this. So let me close down the PowerPoint.
Well, I think you raised some very valid questions. I've been sort of part of that economic system, as I said that I worked at a bank, and I recognize, as you say, that I see a lot of good people there wanting to change the world for the better, but you're also limited by the constraints of the economic system you're in. And for example, often the first question, I'm an entrepreneur, is what's your business model, and what's in it for you? And I do a lot of things for free, or a lot of things that I care about, but at the end of the day, I still need to pay my bills. Um, so I think those are very valid questions, and it also triggered me. I know about, I've traveled to several countries where things are happening that you describe. And to me, it's just mind-boggling, because if you're, in my mind, if you're a proper entrepreneur, you want to pay your, I don't even want to say staff or employees, your fellow um, change makers, if you will, because you also see a lot of people that start a social enterprise and they say, change the world, start a company. Um, but often you see that those startups, scale ups, and those companies need to compete in an economic um, field where we always claim that there's a level playing field. But if we're really honest, there is no level playing field, because mainly the fossil fuel industry, for example, I read a McKinsey report, I think about 2 years ago, that the European Union and now EU 27 spends about 500 billion euros per year on oil and gas or fossil fuels, which is money running out of the European economy and not being spent in making life more sustainable, but also more fun in our education, in rebuilding our nature, so that we actually can thrive as inhabitants of this little piece of land called the Netherlands, part of a bigger planet.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's such an important point. I'm curious to what you think, Simon.
Yeah, so it actually, what you just said really made me think of a story of a friend of mine, actually, who was seeing, he was at this talk, and there were some really, like big shots, people with real political power. And I remember he telling me that one of their goals was to reduce CO2 emission of the country, right? So they tried their best, thinking they were fighting a good cause, but very often they lost track of the real goal, which is reducing CO2 emission in the entire world. So you have all these people within their countries being sort of stuck in the system and having, needing to do this. That basically that's their assignment. But they forget that sometimes it's better to raise your own CO2 emission a little bit if it means that in general over the entire world it would go down, right? By investing in a specific green factory or specific technology. Because if you just decide to take away all of your CO2 emissive factories, for instance, and place them in China, then on a world level, that's not really going to make any difference. So that's really, it was a really clear example of you were just describing as being stuck in the system and even feeling like you're doing the right thing, but maybe losing track of what the true goal is and what really the underlying values are that we should be chasing. So it does require maybe rethinking everything from the very beginning, and also a conversation, just like you said, keeping in touch with everyone and rethinking every time to yourself, wait, what is the actual goal here? Because sometimes it's a lot more complex than you originally think.
Yeah, I fully agree. I would even add that combating climate change is not about reducing CO2, because CO2 is only a symptom of climate injustice that has been allowed um, to metastasize for such a long period of time. Because if it wasn't CO2, it would be something else. There's always another injustice waiting, looming across the corner. Heck, COVID-19 is an example of an environmental injustice. Because if those people were not living all up in each other, if animals weren't being hunted down in a way that is disproportionate and destructive to society, most likely COVID-19 wouldn't have developed, and there would not have been COVID-19, the coronavirus passing over to a human host. Um, so when we understand that all of this is interconnected, we also understand that reducing emissions just does not cut it. It doesn't cut it, because we can talk about that till kingdom come, but the only thing that we will be doing is avoiding impending doom in the now, and then exporting it to the future as we've always done in the past. Slavery was also a thing, and we stopped it, but we changed the type of exploitation because it wasn't people being enslaved, like and being shipped overseas, but it still happened in different ways. It was indentured servitude in Suriname. It was, the destruction of a lot of black and brown belt in the U.S. It was neo-colonialism in Africa. It always has a different name, but exploitation is the same thing. And creating a greener world isn't just about it's about creating a sustainable world. And sustainable doesn't just mean with regards to nature and things that you see outside of you, but people are also part of nature. And we're not going to exploit um, if we're not going to exploit the plants and the trees and the animals, but we're still exploiting humans, it's still wrong. It's still bad. And we need to recognize that, because if we don't, and we continue on this very technological, very technical conversation on climate injustice and environmental change, what will happen, and what is happening already, is that we'll just turn it into another thing. Right now, who can afford green tech? It's rich people, living in the global north. And that tells you that there's still a level of injustice within it that we're not dealing with, and that requires of us to ask the hard questions. So I'm curious to know, which values do you think we need to reach there?
Well, before I answer that question, because I need to give it some proper thought, what popped into my mind is one thing that stuck with me. For example, during the Australian bushfires, I have some friends there, and you saw that people from all over the world were donating to save the koalas, which is great, and more koalas, yay! I fully support that. But that's the first thing that popped into people's mind, and oh yes, let's support the local fire service because the Australian government is not properly funding the brave men and women going out there to put out the fires. A lot of their wineries were destroyed. Well, you would imagine the Western world waking up then is like, oh my God, they're destroying our wine due to climate change. And I think that's a $50 billion dollar industry in Australia. But the fact is that, for example, there were some wineries which lost 80 or 90% of their crops because they were tainted with the smoke. And what was their solution? They were not valuable anymore, but they felt it worthless enough, basically, to feed it to the animals, the same animals we consume. So indirectly, I'm assuming that at least the people in Australia, when consuming pork or something, or perhaps they also fed it to the cows, that they were consuming the same carbon emissions and all the fine particles that went up into the air. And luckily, there were also some restoration efforts. But okay, we're saving the koalas, we're saving part of the forest and replanting it, not nearly the kind of millions of hectares which are being destroyed. But at the same time, there's a big coal project, the Adani mine, being funded, and Greta Thunberg and her following with Fridays for Future, I think, were one of the first people to actually call Siemens out on this. And I was very impressed because that's something that the investors from Siemens hadn't been able to achieve at that time. And they also said they would attend the shareholding meeting. And that pressured the board from Siemens to come out with a statement and seriously look if they could get out under the contract. And unfortunately, they didn't have I'll keep it polite, but they didn't have the courage to back out of the contract, which was a 40 million, not a 40 billion, a 40 million Australian dollar contract for a railroad to the coal mine. If I was the CEO of Siemens, who nobody knew prior to this, but thanks to Greta, now everybody knows his name. If he would have shown true leadership, he would have said, because they used as an excuse that the Australian government had a contract with them and the tiny coal mine, and that the people of Australia, by electing the Conservative government, had voted for that coal mine. I don't think that's the case, because there was a lot of protests and also Indigenous people protesting it. There's 12.5 billion liters of water, if I'm correct, being allocated to that mine, which is taking away from those same farmers, which ironically sort of deny, not all of them deny climate change.
Which is
So you
which
have
is crazy,
farmers,
right?
in a heat-stricken land, which is suffering heat stroke after heat stroke. The country is burning with their forests. You have Siemens being pressurized, like, don't build that train track, which will supply the coal mine. And of course, Siemens' excuse was, if we don't do this, somebody else will build the railroad, the tracks.
Which is actually which is true. Which
Yeah,
is true, right?
to some extent. I think if the CEO of Siemens would have shown true leadership, said in the 20th centuries that is something we might have done, but we're now in the 21st century. We recognize there's climate change. We recognize that's an existential threat to both humankind and to the nature and wildlife. So, dear Mr. Adani, dear Mr. Australian government, we're not going to build that railroad for you. But luckily, we're Siemens. We also have Siemens Gamesa. We have the most amazing, one of the most efficient wind turbines in the world. So we will honor our contract, which was their worry that they would suffer reputation loss or risk if they wouldn't honor the contract. Said we'll still take the $40 million, but instead of a railroad, we'll provide you with $40 million of windmills, and perhaps make even a sweet deal out of it. Say, you know what, this is such a great idea. We'll give you 45 million of worth of windmills. That would have been the best advertising campaign for Siemens ever. Everybody would have recognized the CEO for doing this. Now, as a result, they sort of said, well, we already agreed, we have to honor the contract. And they invited someone from Friday for Future Germany to come on their board. And I'm not sure if I would have done it in their position. I think I would have, to, on the condition that you could criticize them publicly whenever they didn't honor the words they spoke. They chose not to, because they said, we'll be just a token youth person on the board and saying, well, here are the plans, we disagree, but we'll do it anyway. But I think, and that moment has happened now, but there will be similar moments. And Siemens, if you're listening, you can still do the right thing.
Do the right thing, Siemens. I think this is important, because it connects back to what we were talking about, and that has to do with values, and that person did not have a lot of courage. So courage is also one of the important values. So I think if we go back to the presentation, I asked some people to fill this in. Purpose, there's value, there's stewardship, there's sustainability, community, kindness, nonviolence, love. There's a lot of these values that are important and that are currently not present within our system. And that means that we have to intentionally create these values within our system, and that means having these conversations that are difficult about values, and not just about what can we do to avoid this specific technical thing, because when we only focus on the technical, it feels as though it's not human, but these things are very human, because they affect human lives, they affect the lives of every single being living in ecosystems. So that story is very relevant, because that's one of the biggest issues within corporations. We feel so we buy in so much to the paradigm, into the way that we act and the way that we think and the things that we consider normal, that we do it unquestionably. And corporations that act in an unquestionable way, they will continue to cause destruction, because they are not taking the time to actually invest into recognizing weaknesses, and recognizing that they also do wrong things. And as we're wrapping up, what can I do? And I think everybody has the power to make a difference in the world they are at, and in the reality that they exist in. At the same time, personal change isn't the only thing that is necessary. We also have to carry out institutional and systemic change. And we need to understand that a greener world is a more just world. That means that we have to understand that all injustice is interconnected, whether that's gender, whether that's sexuality, whether that's race, whether that's poverty and class. It's all interconnected to each other, and it's interconnected to exploitation that causes climate change. Who gets to, ultimately, when the world flood, which countries are getting flooded? It's the poorest countries in the world. It happens to be the countries where black and brown people live. Women will be the most affected because they're also the most poor people, sexual minorities, the same story. And that means that we need to start asking the hard questions. When you're in a position of power where you are, ask the hard questions, um, and be unrelentless when it comes to these questions. And you can do it in love, you can do it in kindness, but you have to make people uncomfortable. So we're gonna have to learn to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable and be comfortable with making other people, especially people in power, feel uncomfortable. Because the impact of this is going to cause discomfort for everybody. Refugee crises are going to increase because of the fact that countries, especially in Polynesia, Micronesia, will become flooded, and people won't be able to live there anymore. Where are they going to go? They're going to come to Europe. They're going to go to the US. Be open to new ideas and new ways of thinking. That means that we have to reject um, thinking in paradigms. We have to reject being scared of new ideas and being. Sometimes we've convinced ourselves that certain ideas are bad without actually delving into them and saying, what is the good that I can receive from this idea? What is the good that we can learn? Support the work that isn't televised. There's a whole lot of activists out there, a plethora of people continuously pushing for good, doing good, making change, creating projects, helping people, donating, um, teaching. So support the work that isn't televised. And there's a lot of people doing that work in your own community. That means being open to going out of your comfort zone, to meeting new people that are doing the work, and ask them how you can support them, because a lot of them need support. It's hard work. A lot of this work that we do is unpaid labor. It costs money, it costs time, and we're doing it out of the goodness of our hearts. um, and it's a sacrifice. So if you have the opportunity and the privilege to not have to sacrifice as much as other people, please invest in them. And remember, institutional change requires personal change. But personal change alone won't cut it. Just like I said before, that means we have to engage with institutions that exist: government on a local, on a national, on a global scale, businesses, companies, organizations that are doing the work and that are not doing the work. You have to keep them accountable. That means calling your members of parliament, city council, and other national and local organizations when climate policy is being discussed, and bringing it up where you are. That means where you work. That means in your church. That means where you go to school. That means under your friends. You got to do it, because it's a ultimately it's a snowball effect. The more work that we do, the easier it will become for everybody. But right now, what is happening is that most of the work is focused on a handful of people all across the world, and they're tired. They're exhausted, and the pressure and the work is on them, and they will do the work. They will continue to do the work, but
They need
as
backup.
yeah, I think that's important that we recognize that. And last point being, stay informed and connected. Just stay informed and keep on informing yourself and connecting with other people. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank every single one of you for being present, being there, listening, learning, being open. Keep up the good work that you're already doing. And reach out to me if you have any questions, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's at Bertman Hill. I think we will make it if we do not give up. We will reap what we sow if we continue to do the work, and we continue to engage, and we continue to connect to others. We'll win, but we got to do it. Thank you.
And Gilberto, how hopeful are you for a European? Let's start with the European Green New Deal. We'll worry about the U.S. and global Green New Deal later. But government leaders, as you rightfully call out, call your MP, email your MP, your council member, but also people in the European Parliament, Frans Timmermans, Diederik Samson. Let's flood them with emails, I would say, because as said, it took 15,000 people, 15,000 young people in the street last year in the Netherlands and all over the world, millions of people, to actually get our prime minister, who's a good crisis manager and does a lot of good things, but to actually take the climate crisis serious. And he has engaged a couple of times with young people now. And because he called for young people, ironically, to start the revolution, as he said, I'm not sure if he knew what he was in for. But I'm glad he did. I think that's part of leadership as well. But that will also ask of him that it's not just a free quote and a couple of lunches with young people and say like, okay, well, now we've changed the world, but to structurally involve them, to give them a seat at the table, and not just people like you and me and everybody on this panel, but broader. And also, for example, I mentioned this in an earlier session. I noticed that, for example, in the Netherlands, you have the regional energy strategies, and that you see that some of those young people who march in the streets, that they challenged their teachers and their school boards and said, so what are our teaching materials are outdated. You're teaching physics from 30 years ago. Your scenarios are fossil fuel biased. And that I remember vividly a 14-year-old bright guy, and I think he will be doing TU Delft, Eindhoven, Twente, or MIT, or Harvard, or Stanford later, hopefully, or any other university with a technical background, because where you see most council members and people present grasping with the huge scale of how much is 35 terawatt hours for the Netherlands, and he was like, oh yeah, this measures only 3 gigawatts, that's 0.03 terawatt hours, and he baffled the room. And this young man was 14, the same for his peers, both boys and girls who were present, who stood for a much larger group. The question is, how do we involve them structurally? And for example, the 15,000 people that were part of Climate for Youth, if I'm correct, and the Fridays for Future, that they get a permanent platform and don't, for example, have to wait until Siemens is building another railroad at the Adani coal mine, but that they're involved in the process prior.
I was in a panel conversation with one of the founders of Climate for Youth, Stijn Warmenhoven, and so slowly but surely they're getting much more traction. But what I think we need to understand, especially as young people, is power concedes nothing without a demand. And that means that we have to be willing to continuously push, because it's nice to be invited to a minister's house or to have a conversation. It's nice, but it means nothing until there's enough traction and enough pressure to make things happen. Because these people aren't bad people, but they have an incentive to not do a lot with it, because the work is already hard. The work is already hard. So why would you push yourself into an even more uncomfortable area and have to recognize that something exists? I mean, look at the discussion on racism that we have in the Netherlands right now. It's very sad. It's always about something entirely different and not really about the issue itself.
About what the celebrity said about the celebrity instead of the actual issue.
It's never about the actual issue, and that means, right, that we need to continuously push and push and push, and people are going to think you're a complainer. People are going to think you are just someone that is negative and bitter. But no, the reason why we're pushing is because people aren't listening. And until people
and the
start,
problem is they often don't listen to the young people, because I remember also vividly during we're celebrating 75 years of freedom this year, and I'm very glad that we are, and that we live in a part of the world where we don't know conflict, that all of us grew up without actually experiencing war of conflict apart from seeing it on TV probably. And that a lot of the discussions in the groups I was in with a lot of adults was about, should we make it a national holiday, yes or no? And then somebody said, well, the economy, this will cost X billion if we make it a national holiday. And somebody else would say, yeah, but hang on, I have kids. That means I have to take them to the childcare. And somebody else, it was literally hundreds of comments without actually asking, which was the point I was constantly raising. Have you talked to your kids about this? How they would want to celebrate the 75 years of freedom? Because you apparently think it's important and that it should be a national holiday, which I'm not opposed to. But is it the most effective solution? Because we already have the the music festivals, which actually started through a conversation from, at the time, a 15-year-old and his father in the 1980s in Haarlem, who said, well, Dad, you want me to remember the war and to celebrate freedom, but all you've got is military parades with, he joked, a lot of old people, or senior citizens, I should say, which he thought was important. And there was fairs for young families with children, but they said there's nothing for teenagers, for students, for people in their 30s. So they created a music festival. But I think that was a good idea. But the idea behind it has been lost on the new generation. I think there is poem competitions, etc., but that will attract a certain crowd. So my solution was like, make it sort of a permanent challenge that you talk with different generations on it on that day, and then on school, and yes, you go to work, so you actually talk about it at work, and then at 3 p.m. the school children go to the festival. There's events for kids under 18, then at 6 p.m. for the 18 plus, and then at 7 p.m. The people who come back from work join in.
And you know, kids are smart. Kids are smart. People tend to infantilize, like especially here in the Netherlands, we tend to act sometimes as though kids are stupid and can't do anything and cannot think. You know, children can engage with large ideas if you trust them and give them the guidance so that they can do it. And that means and you see the way that politicians treat young people is the same way that people treat people in the story you just told, right? It's always about, oh yeah, but what about the kids? The kids don't care. You know, the kids are connected. The kids want to make a change. The kids are open to new things because we tend to project our biases and our conditioning on towards people that don't have it yet, and then doing that conditions them into thinking that way. So that means we have to destroy these paradigmatic ways of thinking, as I've said before. So thank you for that story. And yeah, the word is up to you now, Simon.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid we need to wrap it up because we're already a little bit over time. But I wanted to thank you again for, for starting this discussion, for actually having this conversation, and for pushing the boundaries. Because what you're doing here is also, through Campus Party and through spending a lot of your time on this and discussing this with us. You're opening the eyes of people, and you're making it an open discussion instead of almost like a taboo or something that's really uncomfortable to talk about. So you raised a lot of important issues. I really like that you also gave us some more practical tips at the end. Stay informed. That's also one goal you are helping with directly. So thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it, and I've learned a lot from you today. And yeah,
and perhaps tying into some of the previous speakers, because we earlier had a NGO who did a challenge. It's called Jointly.Earth, who invited people to work on environmental projects, raise climate awareness, and they did a workshop with a couple of creative entrepreneurs who helped them to gain a bigger platform. And for example, one of the other speaker sessions I moderated was Coder Dojo, which is a non-profit which helps kids learn how to code. But they noticed that there's a lot of kids and their parents interested in sustainability and working on a better planet. So I think there is a lot of potential to tie those topics in together. I won't go into detail because I think we can talk for hours on that, and I would invite you to do that offline or through a different platform after we end this session. Because I think Simon has some announcements about what will be happening on the global main stage later on. But I would like to thank you also for your time, Gilberto and Simon, and on this very interesting session. And I think I would echo you in inviting everybody to, if you watch this later on the Campus Party website or on YouTube, this will stay online, if I'm correct, and feel free to connect with us afterwards, message you, send ideas, possible ways to collaborate.
Agreed. So up next on the green stage, which is a little bit later, will actually also be Lena Hartog. She will talk about the power of the crowd and is also involved in the slow fashion campaign. So that might also really, if this talk caught your interest, then I think that's really a big recommended one. And also, please check out our global main stage, of course, where we will have huge names such as Edward Snowden and Al Gore and Sir Tim Berners-Lee, other people like this. So Gilberto, thanks again for your time, and we will keep in touch, hopefully. Thanks a lot.
Yes, definitely.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.